Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session of the community track. Our next speaker is Jim Haughwout. He is the head of infrastructure and operations at Spotify, and he will talk to us about how Spotify became an active community member of CNCF. And at the end of the talk, please don't forget to go on sked.com and rate the talk.
Okay.
Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Just waiting. Just trying to get the slides to advance. Yeah, for some reason my slides aren't advancing. Be interesting. Do you mind, Dave? Do you want to give me a hand how you set this up? So first production incident on a slide. So in that case, I was just telling someone how I hadn't gotten paged in a few months. So. Yeah, it wasn't going through. Yep. Yeah, it wasn't advancing.
Let's maximize all this stuff and it should be good.
So,
Yeah.
There we go.
And this thing works now too.
Okay, so restart. So as I mentioned, my name is Jim. I lead infrastructure and operations. We call that IO for short at Spotify. Essentially, that's the core infrastructure team for part of our platform mission at Spotify. And the job of platform is we get up every day and we kind of ask about how can we make our engineers basically build code faster, scale safely, and basically be an amplifier for productivity at Spotify. So today I'm going to talk about our move from basically a non-invented here, do-it-ourselves infrastructure provider to an active community member, and I put in paren more active community member because we're still growing in that. We've been inspired by lots of you. This is a talk about ways to move lots of people who are really busy, who are using thousands of existing services with lots of existing infrastructure, libraries, and dependencies, lots of traffic, lots of competing priorities, and how do you go from in-house technology on the path to open CNCF and other FOSS technology. And before I get started, we're still on this journey. By our count, we're on year 2 of it. From that perspective, I'll talk a little about that. We haven't found all the answers. However, we've made some mistakes. We've had some interesting lessons that we've learned. And this community has been so tremendously helpful to us that it's my hope that sharing some of this will help those of you who are trying to go back and help your organizations move to Kubernetes and gRPC and Vitess and everything else. So let's get started from that. So a little bit about Spotify. You all know it's a streaming music provider, two-sided marketplace for consumers and artists, but I wanted to talk a little about our infrastructure. We love infrastructure at Spotify. It's the heart of our technology. It's actually one of our oldest technology teams. We've been an early adopter of modern infrastructure like microservices, containers. Some of the people sitting in the front row actually joined Spotify because of some of the demos they saw at some of our Docker meetups. We've extended the concept of microservices into websites and data pipelines. We're actually now looking and doing that into micro features for our client architecture. But from the purpose here, it's important to know is we have autonomous teams that are unblocked. We do not have a central ops group that controls releases. Every team manages their own software, controls their releases, can pick up technology on their own. So this is a discussion of how do you change hundreds of teams with thousands of services from that perspective, from that point of view. And that was kind of our challenge. A little bit about us. We built a lot of our own infrastructure. It's by necessity. We actually started doing this 6-7 years ago, before there was CNCF. Basically, it was very cool yesterday to hear Dan call out Helios as one of that's our container orchestration technology, which we, as people like to joke, we announced one day before Kubernetes was announced. Clearly, one of the two has a large number of contributors going forward, and that's part of the discussion today. But basically, that's how ingrained infrastructure is to our DNA. These are some of the projects up here. I don't have enough time to go through all of them. You can find them all on GitHub. so take a look afterwards. There's also not on here. Our most popular project is called Luigi. It doesn't have a CNCF equivalent. It's a data pipeline orchestrator. It's got about 11,000 stars on GitHub, so check that out as well. But essentially, we've been using these technologies at scale for years. Here's some numbers. They're all public numbers that you may have seen in presentations. We put them in one place. We have over 200 million monthly active users. We have over 2,500 microservices that we're basically moving to new technologies. At the perimeter, we run at peak at between 8 and 9 million QPS. So from that perspective, we capture billions of events per hour that we use for everything from machine learning to paying artists. We do hundreds of deployments and commits a day. And we have currently 220 open source projects, at least as of Monday, on GitHub that you can take a look at from that perspective. So a big question is, if we're doing over 1,000 deploys a day, if we've got all these microservices, we've been on containers for years, why would we want to change anything? Why are we making this jump? Why make the change? And the really simple answer is it's the power of community. We have, basically our own infrastructure teams, but there's no way that our teams alone can compete with the world at large. We believe by joining a community that's organically growing, we can benefit from their pace and volume. We can give back based on our expertise. And I had some interesting slides on this, but yesterday, basically Cheryl and Janet really did this justice. So 56,000 contributors. I think that's bigger than any infrastructure team in any company around the world, and that's in 5 years. And that Kubernetes saw a 4x increase after they went to CNCF. That really speaks to the power of community, that we're all in this together. We're solving the same infrastructure problems. We have different edge cases. We have different scales. For us, it would be really easy to still stay in Hermes and Helios and keep adding things incrementally. Less change and coordination across our company. But we know that that's not the right way to go. The right way to go is to tap those 56,000 people and contribute to that as well. And the trick is, how do we do that at scale, at the paces that we showed, without adding too much risk or delay? So I'll go a little about what we did first. So from the purpose of time, this is about the last 2 years. So the very first thing is we joined lots of communities from that case. Some of these communities we were members in and we leveled up our involvement. Others we joined for the first time, so we joined CNCF about 15 months ago from that perspective and realized joining and talking to others was a key step. The next thing is we started actively working with CNCF and other FOSS technologies. And I would point out, this is not just hack days. We had whole teams of engineers who were working on this, full access to our cloud and at the time on-prem resources. Now we're 100% in the cloud from that perspective, but it was a full teams of product managers, of engineers, heavy investments working on this, finding the edge cases, what worked, what didn't, trying things out. We even started building some things completely in the open. We have several people that are big FOSS advocates in a variety of communities, both client, backend, multiple languages. And we actually started to build projects completely in the open from day one, so every commit was visible to all of you. We had already had many projects that were open before, but this was taking a deep dive into that. So first things started off really well. One is people were really excited about the change. There were some concerns. We had spent years building all of our own infrastructure. Would we, basically disincentivize people to stay? Would it be like, I'm really passionate about Helios and I don't want to move to Kubernetes, or I don't want to move to gRPC? Would people feel like we weren't special anymore? And that's a question I talked to many companies that people are concerned about, and we found the exact opposite. Engineers love learning and trying new things. So people were excited about trying great technology, finding where it was broken, making it better, learning things that were new, taking our lessons and helping out others. 0 employees left because we made these changes. In fact, a lot of other people joined Spotify, and a lot of people from non-infrastructure teams heard about what we're doing and came over and joined the teams for that. So don't be afraid if you're thinking about it from that perspective. The second was something that we didn't expect, and it was something, this was a learning pointed out by one of our senior staff engineers, so it's not a management point of view, it's an engineering point of view, is just by starting with an open mindset of talking to people, we found our culture starting to change in subtle ways. And just by looking at how other people were doing things and some of the challenges and some of the design approaches, push versus pull and the like, got us to rethink some of our engineering. And as basically, like, one tangible example is ephemerality is something we had talked about but never heavily architected. We're now architecting for ephemerality everywhere from reliability to tracing to observability to storage, and actually taking a concept like that so we can harness Kubernetes and make it available and working in every part of our architecture. And that's something that was deeply enriching because it just brings so many new ideas and so many new engineers in, and we continuously get better. And the next one, basically, we talked about this last year at one of our keynotes, is we've been amazingly impressed about the generosity of this community. So many people reached out and shared ideas with us. We've tried to share lessons learning back as well. I want to take a moment, give a shout out to two people. Alexis Richardson, who's the chair of the TOC, and Matt Klein of Lyft, been tremendously helpful to us. They've come to meetings and shared, so please, in case they watch this video, please give them a quick round of applause, because they're both fantastic. And it's at last minute, they often came and helped out, and that is something we've seen across CNCF. I wouldn't say CNCF is an awesome community, I'd say it's a community of awesome people that work on that. So that's just one of the lessons, and if you haven't paid your end user dues yet, they're worth doing, you'll learn a lot. So it sounds like everything's amazing. Was it? Not exactly. Once we got deeper into things, we hit a few brick walls, and in fact, we hit several brick walls. So I want to share some of the painful things that we learned from this. So the first one is plugging things into an ecosystem is really hard. I could say this is true for really big companies with lots of microservices, but I've talked to people who are, I've spent 10 years in startups and 3 engineers, and plugging into things and doing upgrades is really hard there as well, especially when you're doing on-call at night and development during the day. It's the bigger you are, the more moving parts there are. So, basically, we have lots of edge cases. Everyone has lots of edge cases. We're a publicly traded company of 200 million users, so we've got some interesting edge cases there we see as well. And we like to go really fast and still be secure, so that adds some things. So as good as a project is when you pull it off and you start to look at things and you start to raise change requests and issues, that is just the very beginning for things, as amazing as the technology is. The second is we actually don't want to manage everything ourselves. It was part of our move to cloud. We talked about that last year in other conferences. We have providers that help us manage some of our services for us so we can free up engineers to tackle unique challenges to us. As we work with those providers, given our scale and complexity, we had certain needs. So how do we get them to build the features and capabilities that match our scale of complexity? And does that get rolled back into the CNCF project, or is that in the managed service project? So that's the next. And then the last is adding all of our own integrations. Everyone in this room has services that are integrated with everything from logging to data pipelines to reporting to everything that their CFO needs, to ensure our customers internally had everything that they had before moving to technologies like Kubernetes or gRPC. We had to do a lot of integration into our data pipelines, things that give us competitive advantages for music recommendation we had to plug into and the like, and just controls to stay compliant as a business. So this, only at that point, is something ready for adoption. So that's kind of the magic sweet spot when all 3 of those come together. One thing is this takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time. In some technologies, this took 18 months for us to do, to work and roll out. But I'll give you a really simple, clear world example for Kubernetes. First, we had to basically have a shared virtual private cloud so that all of our individual projects could work together. We have many, many namespaces, so we had to get metrics to support those so that we could actually figure out who was using what in the Kubernetes clusters that we had that were shared. We do have many clusters, and we can talk about that in separate discussions. Then we had to connect everything into our ecosystem, so we could do everything from paying artists to do music recommendations, and people can move from Helios to Kubernetes without any loss of features. And We've now finished that. We're seeing migration. It would have been easier to just keep incrementing features. That would have been a lot less costly, a lot simpler, but we knew the right thing to do was to get on the Kubernetes train because the ecosystem we plug into. This took time, but our customers are very happy. The results we're seeing are amazing, and they're telling us that they're happy from that perspective. But getting into adoption gets into the next big lesson, the M word, migration. So you want to move up to Kubernetes. You want to move the gRPC. You talk to all of your engineering teams and say, we just need you to do this migration. We've learned migration is a 4-letter word, and here's a few reasons why. First is everyone's busy. Infrastructure teams are busy in infrastructure, feature teams are busy on features, data teams are feature on data. Everyone has lots of priorities. Asking someone to migrate just because it's better is not good enough. Basically, that leads us into we have to explain why. Basically, why should I pick this technology versus another? What do I save by doing this? Explaining the why gets feedback, gets people excited. For example, in Kubernetes, we had to explain why Kubernetes first and not serverless later. First, and instead why for us serverless makes sense to come later. The others cloud providers have application engines as a service. Why don't I just use that like other companies versus Kubernetes? So we had to kind of tell that story to get people on board before they could prioritize the work to do adoption. And then the third lesson gets into there's many more degrees of freedom than you imagine. In our field, we like to use the analogy of I'm changing the engine in flight, and the plane didn't crash. I'm an aerospace engineer, so I've always loved this analogy. But we found, especially in a world of unblocked asynchronous teams, this is way too simple. There's one flight crew. There's a pilot and a co-pilot, only 2 people to talk to. Reality looks more like this. Everyone here has their own microservices, their data pipelines, their own priorities. From that is how do we coordinate that messaging across everyone? And at first we didn't do this well enough, and we hit some big walls. And what we had to wind up doing is we doubled down on looking at platform as a product and infrastructure as a product, and starting to think about things like go-to-market plans and coordinating our releases and coordinating our upgrades so they were easier for our customers. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And we've even invested in a product marketing function for infrastructure. And we found that's something that's been able to tell the story and help line up people. So it's much easier for them to migrate and adopt technology. And the last, building in the open is hard. We actually did this a little earlier than we were ready. So it's like you wouldn't go out and run one day and then run a marathon. You train for a while. When you're building in the open, every pull request, you start to question, did I do enough test coverage? Is my documentation clear? Is the pull request even written nicely from that perspective? So that observer effect can slow you down. So we had to learn, you had to build those muscles to be able to build openly. And we learned basically starting slower and then going open source later. So we hit all these for about 9 months. We found this kind of confounding. We're like, should we actually, is this just too hard? Should we just go back and increment things? We had a ton of priorities. Our business is growing very quickly. We have lots of, you've read about, things like podcasts and things like that. Is this just too hard? We have so much on our plate. Should we just go back and be incremental? And we were scratching our heads. We were hitting some walls. And we said, what should we do? And lesson came basically from our teams and from our community. And it was the groups that were building the most community inside and outside of Spotify found the answer. And what it came down to was, here's a little bit, I can tell a little bit of the story on this, is for years we do something called embedding. So people come and they join a team and they work with that team for a while and they try it out and they like it, they join. If they don't, they've learned something and gone back. And sometimes we'll send a specialist to another team and help them out for an infrastructure problem. One of our teams decided to reverse the model. It was kind of a really brilliant, and it's always the little thing. Someone changes the point of view on something. And instead of basically building something and then giving it to the customer, we went to customers with the most pain points and said, could you send some people to build with us? And you have your edge cases, and you have your needs, and we have our expertise, and you have your domain knowledge, and let's get together and build this. And when we did that, we found we had confidence in what we built worked, and they had confidence in what we built worked. And then we could turn around and that person would become an ambassador to go back and get adoption of the technology. And basically, this solves several problems. We actually knew we were solving our customers' problems. We also got some extra resources to solve things. And then we built ambassadors who could go back into their teams and educate others how to use the technology. So basically, this also allowed us to accelerate focusing on things that had the most important need, so we could solve the biggest problems from that perspective. And essentially, this led to a really important learning for us, is that the path to community is not to jump outside first. It's to being more open internally first. It gives you this safe space to build those muscles, to work with others, to actually have more people than your team on a project from that perspective, to think about your documentation, to think about the level of test coverage. It's that safe environment, and you get benefits in less time. And applying this, the results are pretty amazing. So these curves are anonymized curves of various infrastructure components that have had adoption over the last 15 months. Some of them are up at 80% adoption. Some, like you've seen in some of the presentations today, are around 10 or 11%, but those are 0 to 10% in anywhere from 60 to 90 days. The biggest driver of this is when we worked with others and they adopted technologies, they would go back and brag about this really cool thing they did. And it's not you saying the infrastructure is awesome, it's your customer saying this solved a huge problem. We can go 5 times faster now on builds. And then once other customers would see that, they're like, me too. And then they joined and we built together. And that basically validated our beliefs in 2 things: in community and on block teams from that case, of letting teams kind of pick that direction. So this led us to adopt a very purposeful strategy on this, that we've invested very heavily in our infrastructure teams and on our platform at large. We call this building infrastructure together. And basically, in fleshing out this strategy, it has 3 particular ways of how we build things. The first is, rather than inventing things that exist, we look first in the community. And we say, is there a cloud native, is there a CNCF solution, is there another FOSS solution, is there a cloud native partner has a solution? And we say, let's look at that first. If it's not ready, let's contribute to it. It could be pull requests, it could be issues, it could be design discussions. By making it better, it's better for us, it's better for others. And by the way, we can pick up all the lessons and edge cases they've already learned, which as an engineer, you never think about at the very beginning when you're building something. The second one is building with others. So rather than our team going off and building things in isolation, we basically are building as much as possible with others. And that could be customers, that could be partners, that could be people in this room. We've had some discussions about that. And that allows us to take our expertise and domain knowledge and other people's expertise and domain knowledge. And in some cases, we may not have enough resources and someone else may not have enough resources, but together we can tackle something. And it creates natural ambassadors between teams for sharing, where lots of innovation happens. And then the third one is we encourage others to build on us. So we've shifted much more purposely to platformizing our technology. And this is not just APIs and SDKs, but it's building platforms so people can add plugins. It's documentation so people can understand technology without calling us. But it's also setting up the FOSS-style things like Slack channels and Stack Overflow pages and the like, so people can do things themselves. And essentially staffing our what we call goalies in our Slack channels to answer questions from that perspective. But the idea to make our technology easy enough that people can pick it up just like they'd pick up an open source project. And with that, basically, we see fulfillment of use cases we don't think of, but someone else needs to, and it enriches our platform. And this is not just a collaborative development effort. One of the lessons is a collaborative go-to-market planning. So as I mentioned before, that was a big learning. We were just saying, hey, here's something new to pick up for infrastructure. And then our data team's like, here's something new for data. And our client team's like, here's something new for client. And one of our customers said, here's the 900 emails that I got in the last year asking, here are new things. Instead, we're starting to work together and have a common roadmap and a story that tell our customers and external stakeholders, here's what we're producing. And we work with our customers to say, what's the best time to adopt things? So we actually now pull things together. We may delay items so that it makes it easier for people to pick up things, to work with us to pick them up, to give us feedback from that perspective. And that is a big shift that we've had. And here, this graph is about a week old. As mentioned, this strategy that we formally adopted is about 180 days ago, but that we're seeing traction. And so the things we like to look at, you look in GitHub, is what are pull requests. So this is one of our more popular services. The area in the box is what happened after introducing this strategy. And you can see the massive increase in pull requests. Now 3/4 of the pull requests come from outside of our internal community from that. So we're reaping the benefit from that perspective. So this, we're feeling really good. We still had one nagging doubt, and it's one of the things that kind of keeps our infrastructure leaders up at night. It's like, we're doing all of this, but are we actually investing in the right technologies? Is it Kubernetes versus serverless? Which proxy are we going to use? What are we doing for service mesh? There's been enough conversations about that in the last few days. And trying to guess where to invest can be really dangerous. You make the wrong investment, you've got to retool. How do we select where to put things? How do we avoid missing out on something brand new? And looking last year, Simon Wardley had a great presentation and keynote about winning the battle and losing the war, because you weren't focusing on the right things. So we're like, how do we have a strategy that tackles this? And after wrestling with this for about 4 months, we came to the realization is that we already actually had the strategy in place. It was looking at the building infrastructure together strategy and a very different point of view, and it's one about community. So basically, when we kicked off our efforts about 18 months ago and we started joining communities, we viewed this as a point-to-point journey. We were going from do it ourselves, not invented here, to embracing open technologies. And along the way, we hit some turbulence. We basically needed to stop and refuel. We got stuck. And we viewed this building infrastructure together as a waypoint. We're going to stop here. We're going to refocus, rest, build some muscles so we can build in the open more easily. And then after a while, we realized that building infrastructure together was the destination. Because if you're always working with the community, if you're always working with your customers, if they're always working with you, if there's some new great idea, you're going to find out really soon. You're going to work with others and adapt that really soon. You're going to try it out and find the edge cases and say, is it worth it or is it not worth it? And by actually always building with others, we have a much lower risk of missing out on the next big thing. And we stay basically permanently connected in community. So now building with others is our destination. It's what we're doing right now, and it's where we're going forward from this. So essentially, what's next? We're in year 2 of this journey, and year 1 still of building infra together. What we'd like to do is just basically do more and do better of what we're doing. So increasing our involvement in open communities, more pull requests, more design discussions, building more in the open. We have a second team now that's in infrastructure and operations that's building fully in the open now, sharing lessons from the first. We want to formalize our work with others. We've had some preliminary discussions, but we would love for someone's doing interesting things in service mesh, or someone's doing interesting things in observability, and they're wrestling on something, maybe we work together, and we solve that together, and instead of, we both win and we both come out with that solution and maybe co-present in November from that perspective at CNCF North America. And our long-term aspiration is to have our own top-level projects. We're really inspired by the work that many of you are doing, people that are smaller than us that have open top-level projects. I look at Lyft has had a busy business like us, and Envoy has been something we use, and many others, and has been a big inspiration. Shopify, we exchange a lot of, they have twice as many open source projects as us. So that Intuit yesterday got the award, and I watched that they got the 2,500 microservices on Kubernetes in a year. So it's a challenge accepted by us from that perspective, because that's inspirational. But there are so many inspirational stories, and this community has given us access to those, and those are what we're looking at for doing next. So if you want to learn more, check out our other talks. This was the kind of the high-level strategy, but Matthias gave a talk this morning about some of our adoption work. Dave and Austin have one of the end talks. I joked about having them doing it in the taxi line because people are waiting to go to the airport. But they're going to talk about gRPC and some of the lessons we learned there, and dealing with mono repos versus multi repos and IDLs and problems from that perspective. Basically, so take a look at those talks. If you want to collaborate, reach out to me, reach out to any Spotifyer. We're looking to people to build things together with. We're also launching a new speaker series that will be online, internal and external speakers, people who have great stories to come share what they're doing with our engineers. And perhaps we can use our channels to augment your stories as well. So come take a look at that. And if you'd like us to come visit you and share what we're doing, we're happy from that as well. So that's basically, and with that, thank you very much, and any time for questions. So. Yep.
About 5 minutes left for questions, so anyone?
Hello, I would like to know, so if you do develop in the open, so as a company you have some vision for the software component, right? And how do you deal with if there is a contradictory development from, well, pull requests basically in your project? I mean, there's, end of question.
Yep. So the question is like, how do we deal if we're doing a pull request and there's contradictory paths? In part because we've had autonomous teams for years. That's something that we're used to having those kind of debates. So often what we'll do in those cases is, people will tend to pilot both of their own systems. We might even have a fork or a branch or something, or two separate systems. We essentially let the data speak for itself. So we take a look at how it's working in production, how maintainable it is, and perhaps write an internal RFC, or if an external party an RFC, and see kind of how the community votes and let it go with that from that perspective. But that's one of kind of a Spotify value of empowering teams and then kind of letting the data prove that out. So. Oh, there's one more. Yeah.
You mentioned that teams can choose their own release schedules, is that right? Or they release when they're ready. So how do you baseline the technology and the releases to ensure that you're releasing the right stuff at the right times? Yeah. So it's basically mentioned having many different baselines and many different technologies, and how do we do that? We have internally something called like a golden path, and essentially these are the set technologies that if you choose to use, we hope and believe things will be easier from that perspective, and we aspire every day for that. Within each of our teams that are building infrastructure, we have basically a product manager, and we treat the infrastructure as a product. They do things like customer advisory boards, they share public roadmaps. If you go to the project pages, we've now invested in basically using having good documentation, and all of our documentation is converted to static HTML, so you can search on that. And what we do as part of our storytelling is twice a year we go out and we say, here's our roadmap, here's what we're doing this quarter, here's what we're guessing next quarter, and here's future, because we are an agile team and it's hard to predict past that. And then as we do basically monthly and quarterly calls of our customers, so we share about big things that are going out. And by engaging with customers, and we actually also have internal developer advocates in many of the organizations that embed and get information back, we try to use that communication to juggle schedules in such a way that things are less painful. It's not perfect, but it's one that's gotten demonstrably better than we've been doing this for about 18 months. So.
Any other questions? Thank you, Jim, for that informative talk, and thank you everyone for being here.
Okay.